About 4 weeks back, I relocated to a flat that boasted a large window with a view of a graveyard. My neighbor, who lived next door and shared the same vista, warned me right off the bat, never peer into the cemetery at the witching hour. Naturally, I inquired as to why. She explained there exists a shadow dancer and it must not be disturbed. I was taken aback but pressed on, what exactly is a shadow dancer? My neighbor, a woman in her mid-60s, was an eccentric character. She sported denim shorts, high-striped socks, a Grateful Dead tee, and went braless despite her ample drooping chest. I coined that term myself, not knowing what else to label it, she confessed. Some claim to have witnessed a paranormal being, a specter, I can't be certain, that seems to enjoy dancing in the cemetery at that hour. It's not a regular occurrence, but it's best to be cautious so as not to disturb it. Seeing the alarm on my face, she attempted to divert the conversation by mentioning the wonderful community garden nearby and how rent control could be more exhilarating than intimacy. During my initial tour of the property, no one had mentioned any spectral activity in the graveyard. The building itself was charming, with gingerbread trim, a white picket fence, rent control, and 8 units, 4 upstairs and 4 downstairs. A parking lot was situated at the back, between the building and the cemetery, with a wall separating the two. My apartment had both a front and a back door, with a private staircase leading to the parking lot. The proximity to a cemetery didn't unsettle me. In fact, it seemed tranquil compared to my previous residence, which was plagued by noisy neighbors. I shared this with her, and she reassured me that in her 20-year tenure, there had only been one incident when she first moved in, which is why she now cautions everyone. The cemetery was located behind the building. I had rented the end unit on the upper floor, which was closest to it. Only my neighbor and I had a view of the cemetery, as a mausoleum and some trees obstructed the view for the other units. She shared tales from previous tenants of my apartment and long-term residents of the building. I was eager for more details, but she had to leave for her swim class at the YMCA. So she advised me to just shut your blinds at night to avoid the temptation of peering out there, and we can discuss it further later. As I began to unpack and arrange my room, I found myself drawn to the large window overlooking the graveyard. The view was breathtaking. From my vantage point on the second floor, I could see the well-kept grounds in their entirety. The towering trees and lush green lawns resembled a park more than a burial site. Having spent my entire life in city apartments, this was by far the most spectacular view I'd ever had. That night, under the glow of a crescent moon that bathed the cemetery in an enchanting light and filled my room, I couldn't imagine keeping my blinds shut. I resolved then and there to never close my blinds. The window was one of the primary reasons I was smitten with the place. That very night, I found myself awake in the wee hours of the morning. My clock read 2:57 a.m. I don't usually wake up at this hour, but nature called. As I thought of the 3 a.m. rule and glanced at my window, I contemplated looking out. After all, the whole thing seemed absurd, didn't it? Previously, upon my neighbor's return, I had the opportunity to inquire about the circumstances of the former tenant. She confessed her lack of detailed knowledge, but mentioned that they had vacated the premises abruptly. Being a recent resident herself, she was not acquainted enough to provide their contact details. She recounted hearing screams and, upon investigating, found the family pale as ghosts. The mother had suffered a cardiac arrest and was rushed away in an ambulance. I decided against investigating further, not wanting to court disaster on my first night in my new home. The following day, I shared this incident with my best friend. She found it hilarious and suggested it might be a prank. I considered this possibility, although it seemed rather cruel. She shared her own experience of moving into her first apartment where her neighbors had fooled her into believing the existence of a non-existent underground pool. They had a good laugh at her expense before welcoming her with food and drinks. My neighbors, however, had not extended any such courtesies. I hadn't even met the neighbor living below me, who was reportedly a traveling salesman and seldom home. One night, I decided to confront my neighbor and validate my friend's theory. However, her home was dark and her parking spot vacant. My parking spot was adjacent to hers. I retired to bed, contemplating my friend's amusing prank theory. My neighbor did seem eccentric, so it was plausible she was pulling my leg. Yet again, I woke up at 2:57 a.m. I attributed this to some subconscious fixation with the 3 a.m. rule, a rule I was never good at following. I got up to use the bathroom and passed by my window. I considered peeping out but refrained. The crescent moon bathed the surroundings in a soft glow. As I re-entered my room, the clock struck 3 a.m. I glanced at my window and then my bed. I thought, why not, and decided to take a look. I strolled over to my window and peered out. The cemetery was calm and serene. Nothing stirred. The tall trees cast long shadows over parts of the grounds. The scene was quite captivating. I reassured myself that it was probably a prank and commended the joke. As I turned to return to bed, something caught my eye. I noticed a movement in the shadows. At that moment, I should have retreated to my bed and vowed never to look out there again, but I was transfixed. I observed a dark silhouette move into the moonlight. It was a person, a slender woman with long hair, dressed in a flowing black gown. She danced in a contemporary style, as if narrating a story through her dance. Her movements were elegant yet peculiar and slightly eerie. I stepped back to avoid being seen. Suddenly, she halted, her head tilting upwards towards me. Despite her face being obscured by darkness, I felt her gaze on me. I was petrified. My body tensed up. What was I supposed to do? She sprinted through the graveyard, heading straight for me. We were separated by 100 yards. Panic set in. My vehicle was parked right below my window next to the wall. If I attempted to reach it, she would catch me instantly. I contemplated fleeing through the front door and down the street, or perhaps to a neighbor's house. She moved swiftly, reaching the wall and beginning to climb it. I was paralyzed. I held my breath. Her features remained hidden. She seemed like a mere shadow. It cast a glance in my direction before darting under my window towards the building, heading straight for my private back stairs that led to my apartment. The sound of its footsteps echoed as it ascended the stairs. In response, I dashed from my room to the front door, the banging on my back door growing louder and more persistent. I stepped outside and attempted to knock on my neighbor's door, despite noticing her car was absent. There was no answer. I began to descend the front stairs, but halted when I noticed a shadow lurking at the bottom. Suddenly, the faint light illuminating the corridor flickered off. A scream escaped my lips. The creature then charged up the stairs towards me, its footsteps reverberating through the hallway. I hastily retreated back inside, slamming and locking the door behind me. The creature continued to pound on the door from the other side, its body slamming against the door and jostling the handle in its attempt to gain entry. Retreating into the living room, I dialed 9XX on my cell phone. They picked up and I quickly explained that someone was attempting to break into my apartment. However, the call abruptly dropped. I tried to redial, but there was no signal. I screamed for help. The banging suddenly ceased. The apartment had grown noticeably colder, and I could see my breath in the air. I could hear the creature just outside, its claws scratching against the wooden door. After what felt like an eternity, I heard the creature move away from the front door. The sound of its claws scraping against the exterior walls followed as it descended the front stairs, one slow step at a time. I stood frozen, unsure of what to do next. Eventually, I forced myself to return to my bedroom, hoping to see if it would return to the cemetery. I hid in the shadows, praying it wouldn't spot me. I watched as it slinked back to the wall, climbed over, and then paused. It perched on the wall, its gaze fixed on my window. Time seemed to stand still as I held my breath. The creature then waved at me before leaping into the cemetery. It strolled back to where I had first spotted it, and then, inexplicably, it vanished. There was no sign of it, no place it could have hidden. It had simply disappeared. My mind was in turmoil. The fact that it had waved at me was incomprehensible. What did that gesture mean? Was it a farewell or a greeting? What would it have done if it had managed to get inside? I spent the entire night awake, hidden in the shadows, my eyes glued to the window overlooking the graveyard. Thankfully, I saw nothing. None of my neighbors came to check on me, despite surely having heard my screams. Did they all know about the shadow dancer and simply assumed the worst? The following day, I inspected my front door. Scratched into the wood in crude letters were the words, "Welcome home." My mind reeled. What could this possibly mean? I recounted the events to my neighbor. She expressed guilt for not having warned me sufficiently. I moved out that very day, breaking my year-long lease. They can sue me if they want. I'd rather declare bankruptcy than spend another night in that place. As of now, I refuse to look out of my windows at night, terrified of seeing the shadow dancer again. Despite the nightmares it induces, is it strange that I yearn to understand what it is, where it comes from, and what it desires? If you live opposite a cemetery, consider this a warning. You may not be alone in your graveyard,